The goal of the company Sunfire is to close the carbon cycle. Many of you have heard that, but how do we do that? Our core component is what we call our power core. It's a fuel cell, high temperature fuel cell, SOFC, solid oxide fuel cell, which can also be run as an SOEC, solid oxide electrolyzer cell. But what we do especially is to run this reversibly. So on the one hand side, we can enter a fuel, any kind of hydrocarbon. It can be pure hydrogen. It could also be pure carbon monoxide. We'll just have a soup problem then. We oxidize it, we produce CO2 and water, and by there we derive electricity and heat. This works at an efficiency of around 50%. And we can also turn this around, insert electricity. We can also insert high temperature heat, but it's not as significant. So we insert electricity, we insert steam, not water, but liquid steam, steam, gaseous steam, and then we get hydrogen. We can also do the same with syngas. So we can enter water and CO2 directly to produce syngas, which is the first step to enter the chemical industry. So what's new about this is that we can really run it reversibly. In science, this has been published many decades ago that a high temperature fuel cell or a solid oxide cell can be run reversibly, but in practice it has not been done extensively and certainly not beyond the lab. And this was something that we started off a couple of months ago. It was April last year when we published that we had really run it reversibly on stack level and that we were about to run it on system level. And just 4 months later, we got a first order for such a system, 10 sizes, 100 times as big as we had run it in our lab, ordered by Boeing, the American aviation company. But I'll come later to that. So what do we do with this kind of module, this power core, which can be run reversibly? We use it, of course, for combined heat and power. It's far more efficient to have energy or electricity production at home and use the off-heat for heating instead of having centralized big power plants with 30–35% efficiency and then have additional gas burning extra at each house. So what we do here is we use gas to produce electricity and heat. The second thing, the laser pointer doesn't work anymore. Maybe there's another one here. The second thing is then on larger scale commercial CHP. We use it for off-grid power. We use it for auxiliary power units in lorries and trucks. We use it for maritime applications, for hydrogen refueling stations, for renewable fuels, which I want to talk about today, meaning combining the hydrogen with carbon to make any form of hydrocarbon, electricity storage, and we can of course also produce pure CO by inserting CO2 into it and electrolyzing CO2. Now you ask, why do you want to electrolyze CO2? We are an industrially driven company, we need to earn money. And I can tell you one thing, the willingness to pay for 1 kilowatt hour of hydrogen is maybe something like 6, 7, 8 cents per kilowatt hour, because you have a steam reformer as your competitor. The willingness to pay for carbon monoxide is 65 cents per kilowatt hour. Now you will ask, why that? This is because carbon monoxide is so toxic that no one dares to produce it, transport it, and then deliver it to the customer. That's the problem. So there are only very few people who do that, transporting it, and that is so expensive that it's better to have CO2 on site, have it electrolyzed directly at the site of the customer, and then deliver it to the customer. And this is now our first goal for electrolysis, to really provide something like 10 kilowatt electrolyzers of CO2 to then supply carbon monoxide to the customer. If you look at Germany moving ahead with the Energiewende, at least they're communicating they're moving ahead. I think countries like Switzerland have been very practical in the past and introduced a lot of renewable energy from water already. But what we have seen in Germany, and I would say for the rest of Europe except for Norway and Switzerland, is that we had a certain amount of fossil power plant runtime over the year. There was a demand for energy, it was satisfied and supplied by the fossil power plants. Now, what we have done for a couple of decades is we have introduced the renewables, and what happens now is that the amount of runtime for fossil power plants is reduced because the amount of energy demand does not increase with the additional supply from renewables. And as they get priorities via regulation, they go into the system and they take away a part of the value created by the fossil power plants in the past. The problem with this is that if you have a big power plant that used to run for 6,000 hours a year, now only runs 3,000 hours a year, or even 500 hours per year, you don't want to run it anymore. It's too expensive. The fixed cost is too expensive. So the problem is we need those plants for backup power, but nobody pays for them anymore. And maybe you have read on the newspaper that there are big, highly efficient, the most efficient gas power plant in Germany, in Olshausen, 63% electric efficiency, tremendous worldwide. They want to shut it down. Yeah? And it has been a huge investment, and they want to shut it down. So that's the one problem that we have. And the additional problem, the other problem that we have is there's now a need for storage. I mean, you've been talking about that much more today. And there is a need for storage because with those renewables being volatile, you need to store them to get them back into the system once the system needs it. Now, if you want to have 3 elements in your power supply, fossil backup power, or let's say single backup power, whether it's fossil or renewable, let's not argue about it, renewable power that runs whenever the wind runs or the sun shines, and storage, this becomes much more expensive than just a pure fossil power plant system. And therefore, the reversible fuel cell is a game changer. Why? Because it can act as a storage system and it can act as a fuel cell, as a power supply system, but in one device. So you can increase your runtime per year by using it as a backup power system and as a storage system. And in a fully renewable system, we either have the case that we have too much energy or too little energy. We will, at very few minutes per year, have the case that the power supply meets the power demand. And therefore, any reversible system that can take in energy and release energy will have a much higher capacity utilization than one-way systems. A motor is a one-way system. A power-to-gas plant with a pure electrolyzer is a one-way system. Yeah? So running it reversibly improves your economics. And I can tell you, coming from the industry, the work on the economic business models is as hard as getting the technology ready for the market. And therefore, this is really a game changer, and this is also something the investors have understood. And I just want to outline this a little bit to take it a step further. In a renewable energy system, the required base load, I have drawn this as a straight line. Of course, it's not. It's more during the day and less during the night. But the required base load in terms of electricity should be supplied normally from renewable energy, because storing energy and releasing it back is always, even if we get high efficiencies of 70% round trip, we still have to pay the storage system. So this is something we should, if possible, supply directly from the windmill or the solar panel. But we have one more energy requirement in our industry, which is chemical. Yeah? The refineries, the gas grids, the chemical industry, they need energy, and they need more energy than we need electricity. And in the past, we have used chemical energy to turn it into electricity to supply the energy demand of our industry. Now, the whole thing changes. Our primary energy is not chemical anymore, but it's electrical. Electricity you cannot store. In the past, we have had a primary energy that was a storage in itself. So what we have to do is we have to combine those two. And this reversible system can act as an energy release valve for our electricity grid. So once we have too much energy in the electricity grid, we can shift the additional energy into the chemical grid, meaning the refineries, the gas grid, and the chemical industry, producing hydrogen or methane, any kinds of hydrocarbon, any kinds of complex materials made from hydrogen and carbon and nitrogen and phosphor, whatever. They all normally carry energy. And Then we should aim for a system in which we have over-installation, and this is the sort of the red areas here show the times in which we push from the electrical grid into the chemical grid, and we should only have very few times in which we have to use the energy that is in the chemicals that we have in our industry and shift them back into the electricity grid, because this would then require a round trip, and according to our calculations, it's far more expensive to have a round trip system than having a one-way system that is able to run into both directions, but only if you really need it. We should over-install the amount of electrical power, and then we'll have the cheapest system to really be renewable. I know I'm saying something that might sound provocative to one or the other here, but I mean, we're at a conference. I'm happy to discuss those things. There's one more advantage about the high-temperature electrolyzer. If you want to make hydrogen, which is always the start for any kind of chemical compound, from water, you will have to overcome two energetic steps. The first one is the evaporation. So going from a liquid to a gas requires energy. This is what you do once you cook your spaghettis. And don't put it on 12, have it on 3, you have less boiling, but it takes the same time because the water is not hotter. So you just produce more steam by having your plate on 12. So this is the first step you have to overcome. And the second, which is 16% of the energy, and 84% of the energy comes from taking the steam apart into hydrogen and oxygen. I've left away the oxygen, so just this is 84% of the energy. Now, if we use hydrogen for any kind of conversion and synthesis, and I've just put CH2 as a name for something that we can produce, it can be another chemical compound, there's always an exothermic synthesis involved in 99% of the cases. And this is normally at a temperature level above 100 degrees Celsius. So it's able, exergetically, to produce steam, and the steam electrolyzer is able to use steam. PEM or alkaline is not. This is why the steam electrolyzer is much more efficient, because it only has to overcome the lower heating value, meaning the real electrolysis, and not the evaporation enthalpy. And that increases the efficiency of this module from something like 60 to 70, maybe 75%. There are people claiming they can reach 79 with an alkaline electrolyzer. Good if that works. But this can have an electric efficiency of something like 94%. And that really is a dramatic change in energy efficiency in energetic systems. So there are two advantages about this technology. The one is it's reversible, so it has a higher runtime. And the second is it uses steam instead of liquid water. And those two things make it something very attractive for a renewable energy economy. And this is why we have decided at Sunfire to put this out as a singular product. And we are currently building the first prototype in our yard. And the first order has come from Boeing, as I said, which is a reversible system of 100 to 120 kilowatt power input. And it can release something like 60 kilowatt in terms of electric energy, because the SOFC mode has about 50% of the power density compared to the SOEC mode. That's just something we cannot change. There are many rumors out there that reversibility doesn't work. We invite you to share more details or to see more details, but I just want to show here that we have done a lot of tests on modulation. This was just SOEC, so pure electrolysis mode from 0 to 80% within milliseconds. It worked very well with no degradation. And if we run the cycles from 100% electrolysis mode to 100% fuel cell mode, we've done that as well 26 times. We had a degradation of 0.06% per cycle. That's still too much for us, but it's enough to have the first pilot plants. So that's a good result. But also here, our harshest obstacle is currently not the technology development, but many people out there who say, SOC, that's a lab technology, you cannot industrialize it, it has not been industrialized for 40 years, and it will stay the same for the next 20 years. So I invite you to not share this view anymore, and just help us to convince people that it's a very good technology. Now let's move on. If we have a reversible fuel cell electrolyzer that can produce hydrogen or syngas, we can also, of course, move on to any kind of hydrocarbon. And we have a plant in Dresden which consists of a reversible fuel cell and electrolyzer, which is here, and then a liquefaction plant which contains more or less state-of-the-art technology, but no one would believe if you just had it on paper, because we're doing this not only for people like you, but also for politicians. So we have built this plant. It's about 14 meters high, 4 meters wide, 8 meters deep, and it produces a barrel of blue crude. Blue crude is a synthetic crude oil, made from CO2 and water. So we produce hydrogen in there. We introduce CO2 into this plant together with the hydrogen. We have a two-step technology. The first one is a reverse water-gas shift reaction, producing syngas, and the second is then the Fischer-Tropsch synthesis. You could also, of course, also insert a methanol synthesis, but Fischer-Tropsch gives you a product that is close to the market. It can be used in the existing infrastructure, and that's very important to make people understand that we can shift from fossil to renewable fuels without changing our cars and without changing our refinery. Now, I'm not saying that electric cars or fuel cell cars are not better than combustion cars. They definitely have their advantages. They have their right in the market. But looking at planes or looking at long-distance terrestrial cars, they will need energy-dense fuels also in the future. And by now, there's no application that can run a plane on batteries, at least not if it's a passenger plane. So I would reckon even if the fuel demand decreased by something like 50% or 60%, which would be huge, we would still have $1 billion market. And therefore, it's worth doing this. We had the opening of it together with our partner Audi and Lufthansa and Boeing in last November. The Federal Minister of Germany for Education and Research, Mrs. Wanka, introduced the first CO2. And then today, 2 weeks ago, we had the first fuel, 5 liters, fueled into her car. So she took over the responsibility to say, okay, this really works, I believe it. And we even had her herself fueling it. She splashed a lot of fuel onto her suit and so on, but somehow it didn't. She was really fascinated about it. This is the Audi manager. And we had a great day together, and we fueled it. And I just want to emphasize on one thing, how to move from let's just see. Oh no, maybe it was something here. No problem, it's working now. But anyway, what we need to do is, if we look at the refinery, it currently gets its hydrogen from a steam reformer. This is, of course, the lowest hanging fruit. So take away the steam reformer and have renewable hydrogen inserted into a refinery. One refinery has as much energy demand as about one nuclear plant produces, even more than that. So if we just wanted to replace 5% of this energy demand, and this is about the amount that a refinery takes from hydrogen, not from crude oil, 5% come from the steam reformer, we would already have $1 billion business just for Sunfire. So let's not talk about the market is too small, the market is not the limit. We just need the know-how and the awareness and the regulations that allow a business model, but then we can really start inserting hydrogen into a refinery and thereby replace the steam reformer. In a second step, we could then use the CO2 that is produced in a refinery, which is about 12% of the carbon entering a refinery is turned into CO2. So we could use this CO2 and then insert it into a power-to-liquids plant with more hydrogen to make it greener, thereby produce a quota fuel. And then in the end, we can get rid of the oil field by really adding additional CO2. But I want to be very frank here. This is the vision and not the start. The start is pure hydrogen in refineries, and this will be a task for a decade just to replace the hydrogen. However, there may be motivations to build pure power-to-liquids plants with CO2, sort of including the whole process, electrolysis, conversion, synthesis, for other reasons. And this is why we are, for example, working together with a Swiss company, Climeworks, taking CO2 from ambient air. I know some of you know this company, and I can only recommend to look at that technology. From our point of view, it's one of the very few people who have really understood how to take the thin CO2 out of the air. So, but I want to say, many people out there say, why don't we do a hydrogen economy? Why should we do power to liquids? It's not like this. Let's start with hydrogen. Let's put the hydrogen into the systems that are currently using fossil hydrogen, and then let's move forward. And just the first task is something that we can work on for decades. I also want to emphasize on one thing that we've been testing in the past. Many people say that chemical processes cannot be combined with volatile energy input. I think I've shared earlier that our electrolyzer can manage volatile power input, and even the Fischer-Tropsch synthesis can. And this is something that we have done. This is the reverse water gas shift reactor. We have reduced the power input by 50% within 20 minutes, and it was our first try. We had not prepared it, but it was so easy to run that we just tried. It worked well, so within 20 minutes to 50% of the power, and then within 20 minutes back up again. And the same to Fischer-Tropsch behind. So Fischer-Tropsch lost 3 degrees Celsius in temperature because, of course, we had less gas in it, so it was less exothermic. And because many people had told us, oh, be careful with the hotspots and so on, we had a few more liters of cooling water running through it. If we hadn't done that, it was just a matter of cautiousness. If we hadn't done that, we would have kept a straight line here. So both the Fischer-Tropsch synthesis and the reverse water gas shift reactor can be run volatilely, and maybe not as flexible as an electrolyzer, but you can put a small buffer in between, and then you won't have a problem. Then we have done some tests. I think you are experts, so I don't need to explain you that Fischer-Tropsch is a very, very nice diesel. So we have a diesel that it really drives crazy. I've had it in my car. Nice. Just can recommend to try it. There's a problem, of course, when it becomes really cold, because you only have those straight chains. But I can only tell you that our goal is not to make a ready diesel. Our goal is to produce a blue crude that goes into the refinery. And behind the refinery, you will have diesel with isomers and even with aromates as you've had it in the past, and you will not notice a difference. So Fischer-Tropsch can really help to move or to turn the refineries into green refineries without investing a lot of money into the refineries. I also want to state that we have been working on some scenarios for renewable hydrogen from steam electrolysis, and also compared to PEM or alkaline, we see the difference in terms of the energy cost because we only need 84% of the energy that a PEM or alkaline electrolyzer needs, and this helps to decrease the cost compared to the others. This is a study from the European Union, and in terms of how much does a liter of fuel cost from a power to liquids plant, this is the EU gas station diesel price, and this is the cost in terms of scale. So if you have something like a 25 or 100 megawatt plant down here, but even a 5 or 10 megawatt plant, you can get into the range of the prices that you pay at the gas station. But I want to emphasize on one thing. Renewable chemicals will never be as cheap as fossil ones, because there's a difference in the cost structure. For renewables, we always have 2 steps. We have the renewable energy harvesting, which is basically a compression of renewable energy. So we compress the sunlight into something dense, and compressing costs energy. So the very fundamental principle of compression shows that there is no way to get around the renewable energy harvesting costing money. The second thing is that we then have to convert the dense energy, whether it's electricity or hydrogen, as you outlined before, into some hydrocarbon compound. This also costs energy. Now, the fossil power plants or the fossil refineries, start having this already. And they just need to do some refining, which also needs to be done to this. And if you just look at the cost for 1 kilowatt hour of fossil fuel, 1 kilowatt hour of fossil fuel costs currently probably something like 3 to 4 cents per kilowatt hour. 1 kilowatt hour of renewable electricity costs something like 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 cents if we are at really good places. And you cannot turn 5 cents per kilowatt hour electricity into 3 cents per kilowatt hour of fuel. That unfortunately doesn't work. Bankers always think so because they think in the term of interest. But there is no interest in energy. There's always a loss when we turn something into something else. So 5 cents per kilowatt hour electricity will always end up in something like 7 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour of fuel. And this is something that we really need to tell the politicians and the public, because asking for parity with fossil fuels is something that puts everything that we are doing here with renewables into question. Maybe in the long vision with something that takes the energy from the sun and turns it directly into a fuel at the site, but personally I don't believe it. I don't believe that it can achieve the same cost as fossil oil exploration, not in the next 20 to 30 years. And this is the kind of vision even scientists need to share. So thank you very much for sharing these more economic thoughts and the big picture, and I'm ready to take questions if you have some.